Welcome back to the next video, and let's keep it going now with a new and pretty advanced Mongoose feature called Virtual Populate. So at this point we have populated the reviews with the tour and the user data right here, right? And so right now when we query for reviews, we get access to that information. However, that still leaves one problem unsolved. So how are we going to access reviews on the tours? So basically the other way around. So let's say that I query for a specific tour, and then how will I get access to all the reviews for that tour? And this problem arises here because we did parent referencing on the reviews. So basically having the reviews pointing to the tours and not the tours pointing to the reviews. And so as we said in the beginning of the section, in this case, the parent does not really know about its children. And so in this example, the tour does not know about its reviews. And sometimes that's okay, but in this case, we actually want the tour to basically know about all the reviews that it's got. Now, in order to solve this, with what we know at this point, we could have two solutions. And the first one would be to manually query for reviews each time that we query for tours. But it would be a bit cumbersome doing it manually like this. And the second solution could be to also do child referencing on the tours. So basically keep an array of all the review IDs on each tour document. Then all we would have to do is to populate that array, right? But we actually already ruled out doing this right in the beginning, because we do not want to store that array of review IDs that could then grow indefinitely in our database. Right? And that's actually exactly why we picked parent referencing in the first place. However, there is a great solution for this. And that's because Mongoose actually offers us a very nice solution for this problem with a pretty advanced feature called Virtual Populate. So with Virtual Populate, we can actually populate the tour with reviews. So in other words, we can get access to all the reviews for a certain tour, but without keeping this array of IDs on the tour. So think of Virtual Populate like a way of keeping that array of review IDs on a tour, but without actually persisting it to the database. And so that then solves the problem that we have with child referencing, right? So it's a bit like virtual fields, but with Populate, okay? So just to illustrate that, let's go to our tour model here. And so what I just described would be, in theory, to do something like this. So on our tour model, we would add a field called reviews, and then set the type to mongoose.schema.objectID. And you don't need to write this. I'm just doing it to show it to you. And then connect it with review. And of course, this here would have to be an object. But what matters here is that this is basically how we would implement child referencing. So the tour referencing reviews. Okay? But again, we do not want to do it. And so instead, we're going to implement Virtual Populate. All right? And it works like this. So we do it here on the tour schema. And we still do it .virtual, so just like with this virtual field here, duration week. Then we type in the name of the virtual field, so let's call it reviews, and then an object of some options. And the first one is the name of the model that we want to reference. And so that works just like with the normal referencing. So again, the name of the model. So review, of course, in this case. And now we actually need to specify the name of the fields in order to connect the two data sets. And this is for me the most complicated part of implementing this virtual populate. And so let's make sure you really understand this part. So here we need to specify two fields, the foreign field and the local field. So let's start with the foreign field. And so this is the name of the field in the other model. So in the review model in this case, where the reference to the current model is stored. And that is, in this case, the tour field, right? So let's take a look at that. And so again, in our review model, we have a field called tour. And so this is where the ID of the tour is being stored. And so that's why here in this foreign field, we specify that name of that field in order to connect these two models. Okay? And now we need to do the same for the current model. So we need to say where that ID is actually stored here in this current tour model. So local field, and that is the ID. So underscore ID. Okay? And so again, this underscore ID, which is how it's called in the local model, is called tour in the foreign model. So in the review model. Okay? And so again, this is how we connect these two models together. Let's just write here that this is virtual populate. Okay? And so now with this setup, we can actually use populate just like we did before. And so what we want to do now is to go ahead and populate the tour when we only get one single tour. Okay? So here in Postman, it is in this situation of get tour. Okay? Let's see if this actually exists. And it does, but it's this weird test tour. And so let's actually do it with this forest hiker one. All right. So when we get this tour, we now want to populate the reviews. And it should already be here as an empty array. Here it is. It's not an empty array, but it's set to null. But the virtual field is actually already there with the reviews. But it's null at this point because we didn't yet populate it. Okay? And again, we only want to populate it here in the get one tour and not get all tours, because that would be a bit too much information to send down to the client when they get all the tours. Also, when we're getting all the tours, that's usually to build like an overview page. And in that case, we usually do not need access to all the reviews. We only need that when we are really displaying just one tour. Okay, and so I think it makes sense to only do this populate on get one tour. So let's do that populate actually right in the controller. So the tour controller, and down here where we have get tour. And so that's actually very easy. All we need to do is to call populate after the other query and then simply pass the name of the field that we want to populate. And so as we already know, that is called reviews. And so that should actually be it already. All right. So let's test this now and take a look at this. And indeed, we now get our complete review right here. All right. So that got populated. And so it means that our virtual populate is actually working. Now you might start to see that this is creating kind of a problem, because this here is basically creating a chain of populates, and that's not ideal at all. So we have the tour being populated with reviews, but then the reviews also get populated with the tour again and also with the user. And then also the tour is also getting populated with guides, which in this case is not happening because there are no guides. But if there were, then we would have yet another populate. And so here we would have a chain of 3 populates. And so for performance, that's of course not ideal at all, especially here with the tour. So we have the tour populated with reviews, and then in the reviews, we again have the data about the tour. And so that doesn't make much sense at all. So it's kind of a mess now. So the solution that I'm going to use here is to actually turn off populating the reviews with the tours. Okay, so basically we do not need this data here on each review. So in this case, I think that's a good solution. But of course, again, in your case, it will always depend on how your application works in your specific case. But in this app, it's more logical to really have the reviews available on tours, and it's not that important having the tour available on the review. Okay, so let's turn that populate off, basically, in the review model. Okay, so let's just comment this part out, copy it down here, and so basically get rid of this first one. All right, give it a save. Let's try it again. And so now we should only see the ID of the tour here. Okay, and indeed, that's exactly what we get. Okay. Now with this, of course, we still do parent referencing. Okay. So we still keep a reference to the tours here, but we simply do not populate it. And again, because we don't always need that data right here. All right, let's just quickly recap what we did here. So we started doing only parent referencing on the review. But that made it so that on the tours, we had no access to its corresponding reviews. And the easiest fix for that would be to also do child referencing on the tours. But the problem with that would be that we do not want to actually keep an array of all the child documents on the parent document, right? Because again, we don't want to allow arrays to grow indefinitely. So instead of doing that, we implemented virtual populates like this. All right, so just like this. And this allows us to basically do the exact same thing. So keeping a reference to all the child documents on the parent document, but without actually persisting that information to the database. And so then, after having this virtual populate set up, all we needed to do is to basically use populate just like we did before with the real references. And then finally, we also turned off one of the populates that we had on the review. So this one here, where we populated the tour ID, because that was creating kind of an inefficient chain of populates. And so that's, of course, something that we do not want. And so in the end, we ended up with a result like this. Okay, great. So I hope that made sense to you. And so with this, we actually wrap up for now all of this part of populating. Okay, and so let's now move on to a next topic, which is basically creating nested routes.